Hey everybody, I thought I would put together a quick video talking about false soles. I did cover 5 common problems that horses have with their feet in human care, and false soles is one of them. I wanted to do a little bit more detail for you. We're going to use some pictures and a little bit of 3D action again in Blender, which is a program that's free. And if you've never done 3D work, this is the program to use in my opinion. But I wanted to discuss what a false sole is and how to recognize it. The causes can be varied. It could be anything from past trauma to just lack of trimming. But generally, I would attribute a false sole to the horse's desire to protect the new and the growing sole that is coming from the foot. So I've got a picture on the screen here, and this is a horse that had a very thick false sole. In fact, I did 2 cycles of this trimming, which was amazing. I've not seen such a thing, so this is a great case study to show. Now, when it comes to figuring out if a horse has a false sole, first we must kind of understand what the sole is. And if I take a look at another picture sort of from the side, we can see a little bit better sort of what the angles are of what the sole is. The sole is the bottom of the foot that is between the walls and the frog, and the bars as well. There are bars in there. The bars are also wall. We'll discuss that in another video. But the sole is just this bottom bit, this stuff that lives on the bottom of the foot. And no different than our own feet, so pretty easy to understand. And one of the biggest indicators that we can see from this picture and the previous picture is how the sole is sort of sticking up above this carved off stuff right in here. And if we take a look at this original picture here that we're going to take a look in 3D, I've essentially, all I've done is I've taken a hoof pick and I've scraped away at some of the dusty, sort of flaky material that just exfoliates off rather easy. It doesn't require a knife, it doesn't require a rasp, no filing, no grinding, no nothing, just a hoof pick. And when we see this happen, we can make a decent assumption. If we take a look at this one again, we can make a decent assumption this dusty stuff is sort of hiding something underneath. Now, otherwise, I mean, if I didn't do that, this would look, it would look pretty like this is a normal sole. And if you never sort of scrape this off, it wouldn't have really shown. So sometimes you got to scrape away at a sole, and we'll look at some pictures after I've trimmed to understand that this would never happen on proper live growth of sole. It just does not do this. This is a physical attribute that we can unconditionally say this is false sole, meaning that it's sole that it may not need to be there. It doesn't mean it doesn't need to be there, but it may not need to be there. And if it's this flaky, clearly 2 things have happened. One, quite possibly something has happened, but mainly that it hasn't been trimmed correctly. And 2, we can say when this does happen, we're going to have overgrowth everywhere else. So as you can see, as I do this, and we take a look at the picture here, we can also tell that based on the depth of where my scraping has gone, the walls are going to be quite long. And by allowing the sole to continue to grow like this allows the walls to continue to grow too far, allows the frog to grow too far. And you can see this frog is kind of old and rough looking. If you don't have a lot of experience looking at the frogs of a foot, I can tell you straight out, this is an old, sort of not good looking frog. So if we sort of cruise along in the pictures here, and I'm kind of hoping I can get these little arrows to show up, but they won't. So we'll close that and we'll open up another picture here. And we can see how I've started to take off some of that false sole. And you can see the thickness of this. I mean, it is incredible. And so the first step of discovering whether a horse has false sole or sole that can be exfoliated off is just to use your hoof pick. Don't use a knife, don't use a file or a rasp or anything. You can just use your hoof pick to discover some of this flaky stuff. And the interesting part of a false sole, in my opinion, this is a lighter hoof, so it's not, sometimes we're not going to see the color that we see here. But if we look really closely, right in the middle, we can see a bit of red in this sole. Now, if you look closely at a dark hoof, you can sometimes kind of make out a bit of a color change that will indicate bruising. But this is really old bruising. This is very old bruising even. This is probably months old bruising. But when horses get a false sole, they're getting a false sole, either one, through that lack of trimming, or two, the trauma. Something happened. And what the horse is going to end up trying to do is getting rid of all that old sole, but growing a new one underneath, which is going to be immature. And this happens with shedding frogs as well. A whole frog will grow in, a whole brand new set of layers of good frog will grow underneath the old crappy frog, which has had trauma and is not going to last. And so when we start to peel off bits and pieces and we start to look at if the sole underneath is ready, it's generally going to be in the end, it won't be flaky. But if you look here, this is the tricky part of a false sole, in my opinion. Or at least one like this. There are others that it's clear, like whole pieces of sole just start peeling off. But that also is usually a lack of proper trimming. Now, this horse came to me like this, so I had to do some work after discovering this because I thought it was a very strange hoof. I mean, even if I didn't scrape this stuff off, this whole foot looks weird. There's no definition to the bars. We don't see anything of where this bar is properly growing, which kind of tells us also that the sole has sort of grown over and grown into, and it's sort of just retaining some sort of little shape of the bar that lives underneath there. It's a little bit hard to explain in that regard, but to be able to recognize it with your eyes is a fantastic thing. How you deal with it is another story altogether, but we'll walk through that a little bit. Other things to note here actually are over in the heel. We can see something's trapped underneath here based on this major discoloration. And then over here in the bar, there's also something stuck underneath there. So when we see these telltale signs, and we can also see over here that there's extended rot from the quarter. So when we see, and right, as I look at this picture more and more, each time I think I could do a great video on this. There's so much to talk about, but these little bits here, these little cracks that live right here, when this hoof is in hand and you're looking at it with your own eyes, obviously there's infinite definition, whatever your eyeballs can see. This is a picture, so we can only get so close. But I can't stress enough how many signs are here of this being a false sole, let alone that I've carved out this edge. And this edge, interestingly enough, is sort of where the white line will end up ending. And the white line is sort of the barrier between where the hoof wall is. So this wall here and the sole. Somewhere in here, the white line is going to end up a little bit in, because this stuff here was a little bit more solid. So let's set that down. And we're back to the picture where I'm partially done. And the thing to note when you're dealing with false sole is this crack, or this separation of layers. But the trickiest part of it, like I said, a false sole will present itself with this flaky, white, useless material that should have exfoliated off if the horse is on hard enough ground. But in this case, never did. And in turn, what it did, I believe, is just compact down into this very hard, not very flaky looking stuff. But the layer that's underneath it is not connected. And we can see that through this fracture of material that lives on a different sort of layer than the layer underneath it. The horse has built up a soul, and then something's gone on, some kind of trauma probably of some sorts, and then it tries to build a brand new soul underneath that. And it says, I'm quitting on that one, I'm not connecting it, but I'm going to start building a brand new layer. And as if the horse is up here, as that false soul lives there, it's going to, the new soul is going to sort of push down and push down, but they'll always be separate. And that is exactly what this crack is here. And so this is a very thick false soul. And as I said, I had to do this 2 times. So let's move forward just a little bit as I go. And here's a little bit better of a picture or angle-wise, so we can see how this is literally 2 different layers of material. And the layer that's sitting there, the sort of not so good look, this is not very good looking. There's something to be said for the consistency of it, the coloration of it, all these little weird marks in here, these bruisings, bits of bruisings all over the place. It shouldn't be this way. This is not what a soul should look like. So to give a little bit of an idea, we're going to just wander into this 3D project that I've done to give you a better visual. And what I've done is I've modeled out just the basic walls. So of this foot here, I've modeled out what are the walls, and the walls are connected directly to the bars, the heels, bars, wall, all the same kind of material. And so if we bring in this sole, and this is going to be the original, so we might as well bring in the frog. What the heck? Let's bring in the frog. It's there. So the frog lives there, right? So we've got sole, bars and wall, and frog. And then this is new frog, or new sole, good sole. And then on top of that is this false sole. And these are 2 different materials. 2 different materials, 2 different sets of layers. And in many cases, for a while, this false soul will sort of live there to protect the newer, growing and immature soul, because it'll be quite soft and it'll be a bit elastic and weaker. And in turn, if we don't keep the false soul in for long enough, we were to prematurely cut soul and sometimes prematurely cut false soul. We can actually cause another happening of a soul, a massive soul exfoliation, or another cause of the false soul. And that can happen. And when it does happen, you just deal with it. You just kind of move on, and it will stop as you care for the horse and get their walls and their bars and their sole and their frog cleaned up properly. It will then finally just grow out normally and not be put up with any more trauma anymore. So it's kind of, I thought this would be a decent sort of representation in your mind of what happens. There's 2 different souls. It's the same thing, same shape, same everything to it, but it ends up sort of covering these bars. And if we get rid of that soul, we can see where the bars should be ending. So when you see bars that are buried underneath here, like we can see in this picture here, these bars, there's nothing there. There's no defined bar. And so as we move forward in the trimming process and we continue on, we can see we've also got this bruising along where the white line does end. You can see it kind of goes along here. I don't know if you guys can see it. If you look very carefully, there's these little lines. This is the lamina. This is the dermal and epidermal lamina. It's like Velcro. It holds the wall onto the foot kind of thing. And as we go around, we can see these sort of horizontal lines kind of going in, and they all live around here and goes all the way around, and it's called the white line. So when we get to good sole, it doesn't look chalky and white. It looks more like soap, I guess, like a white soap. Clean, doesn't flake, which is somewhat kind of the hard part about getting rid of false soul sometimes, because even this false soul sort of looks clean, but in fact isn't connected. So we have to be cautious of how much we do remove. We want to keep stuff that is still looking like it's reasonably connected. But if we look back on a previous picture here, we can see this isn't connected anymore. There should be there is a gap in there somewhere that we can start to carve away at. So we'll come out of there and we'll take a look at another angle here of most of it done. And the other thing to pay attention to is this stuff in here. We can tell that there's a problem. And when a false sole happens, the walls get too long as well. And when the walls get too long, they want to flare out and they want to tear off. And when they do start to tear off, you get this bleeding, this bruising that happens in there. And but other than that, so if we just zoom out a little bit, we can see how half of this is done. And we've got the bar here, right? It's no different than if we take a look here, we get rid of this extra sole here, and we can start to see that there's bar here. Now this bar is sticking up because it's just my 3D model at the moment, but we'd put a little bevel on that. And when we put a little bevel on that, it ends up looking like this. And if we go a little bit further and we look down it, we can see we've still got that fantastic concavity. We're not carving concavity into this foot. We're getting rid of some false sole that it doesn't need anymore, and in fact is causing the problem, those walls coming off and tearing off and bruising. Until finally we get what is essentially a very clean looking foot. There's still some here. If we look really closely, we can still see that there's a bit of false sole left in here. Hopefully you can see this, and it's just a hair in there, but it's not ready to go yet, which is why this horse needed 2 turns, because there was still another. And if we look here inside here, we've got these little dots, and these little dots are telltale signs of stuff. And we also still have to fix all of the walls. The walls are too long and they're flaring out. And so a lot of times, you know, we have this problem. And this coloration in here, this discoloration in here isn't a good sign. It's tearing of the corium underneath and bruising. And this also had to clean out. This isn't a normal thing to see. And as I kind of go along here, we can see these little layers of stuff that still kind of live in there. And then all of the tearing in the heels and quarters and the bruising. And you see now the frog is a little bit cleaned up, but it's still quite discolored. There's still sort of a bit of redness, I guess we would call it. And it just is, it's really old. None of this is new. If you look at something like this, these bruises, this discoloration didn't happen in the last month or something like that. It was months ago when this would happen. And so we're just dealing with what it is now. And in the end, this is what the foot ended up like. And if we take a quick look at the before, this is the before. And we want to get rid of that bruising. We want to get rid of that past trauma so that new stuff can continue to grow down and have the available space to grow down. And if we didn't and we left all this false sole here, sooner or later it would fall out. But it's no different than having something on the bottom of your foot, like a big callus or something like that. It's quite uncomfortable, and it causes horses to move differently and not be as free. And in turn can also continue to cause more trauma in the future. So there's the after. Again, the frog's been cleaned up quite a bit. All the sole's been cleaned out and the walls have sort of been trimmed back. And if we look down it, we can see we've got quite a clean, rounded edge. We want to definitely round this edge off so that it can continue to wear out nicely anything more that it's going to need to do, rather than have the horse stand up on its walls. It's quite uncomfortable for horses to be peripherally loaded, is a good word to put. Anyhow, if there are any questions, if you guys are wondering about anything, if I haven't explained something, and like to know something else, let me know anytime, of course. But that's it. That's false soles in a nutshell, how to recognize them, and in this case, how to deal with it, and quite common to how to deal with it. We're looking for stuff that is ready to come up. We don't remove everything. Like seen in this picture here, even though there is still this little sort of line that exists there between the 2 layers, it wasn't ready to go yet. It's still too connected. So we just keep that protection in place and work on the rest. and clean it up. But we don't want to carve into live sole at all. It's definitely something we don't want to do. And there's plenty of videos out there. I saw one recently of a farrier that just shaved off good live sole. We never want to shave off live sole. If anything, you want to leave it a little bit sort of this flaky-ish kind of stuff. It's okay if that exfoliates off later. We don't need to do it for the horse. So this continued to heal up, and everything got back to normal within a few months, and horse is living happily ever after. Thanks for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one.